Little Women, Chapter 2. A Merry Christmas. Joe was the first awake Christmas morning. The winter sunshine crept in to touch the bright heads and faces with a Christmas greeting. "Where is Mother?" asked Meg, as she and Joe ran downstairs. "Goodness only knows. Some poor creature come a-beggin', and your ma went straight off to see what was needed. There never was such a woman for giving away victuals and drink, clothes and firewood," replied Hannah, who had lived with the family since Meg was born, and was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. "She will be back soon, I think, so fry your cakes and have everything ready," said Meg, looking over the presents, which were collected in a basket and kept under the sofa, ready to be given at the proper time. "There's Mother! Hide the basket, quick!" cried Joe, as a door banged and the girls rushed to the table, eager for breakfast. "Merry Christmas, Marmee!" they cried in chorus. "Merry Christmas, little daughters. I want to say one word before we sit down. Not far away from here lies a poor woman with a little newborn baby. 6 children are huddled into one bed to keep from freezing, for they have no fire. There is nothing to eat over there at the Hummels, and the oldest boy came to tell me they were suffering hunger and cold. My girls, will you give them your breakfast as a Christmas present?" They were all unusually hungry, having waited nearly an hour, and for a minute or two no one spoke. Then Joe exclaimed, "I'm so glad you came before we began. May I go and help carry the things to the poor little children?" asked Beth. "I shall take the cream and the muffins," added Amy, giving up the food she most liked. Meg was already covering the buckwheats and piling the bread into one big plate. "I thought you'd do it," said Mrs. March, smiling. "You shall all go and help me, and when we come back, we will have bread and milk for breakfast, and make it up at dinner time." They were soon ready, and they set out through back streets, arriving to find a poor, bare, miserable room, with broken windows, no fire, ragged blankets, a sick mother, crying baby, and a group of hungry children cuddled under one old quilt, trying to keep warm. How the big eyes stared and lips smiled as the girls went in. "Oh, my God! It is angels, good angels come to us," said the poor woman, crying for joy. That was a very happy breakfast, though the girls didn't get any of it. And when they all went away, leaving comfort behind, I think there were not 4 merrier people than the hungry little girls who gave away their breakfasts and contented themselves with bread and milk on Christmas morning. "That's loving our neighbor better than ourselves, and I like it," said Meg, as they set out their presents, while their mother was upstairs collecting shoes for the poor Hummels. "She's coming down. Start playing the piano, Beth. Open the door, Amy. 3 cheers for Marmee," cried Joe, prancing about, while Meg went to lead Mother to the seat of honor. Beth played her most cheerful march, and Amy threw open the door. Mrs. March was both surprised and touched. She smiled with her eyes full as she examined her presents and read the little notes which accompanied them. The slippers went on at once. A new handkerchief was placed into her pocket. A rose was fastened in her bosom, and 2 nice gloves were pronounced a perfect fit. There was a good deal of laughing and kissing and explaining in the simple, loving fashion which makes these home festivals so pleasant at the time, so sweet to remember long afterwards. And then all fell to work, preparing for the evening festivities. The girls put their wits to work and made whatever they needed for their Christmas play. No gentlemen were admitted, so Joe played male parts to her heart's content. The smallness of the company made it necessary for her and Meg to take several parts apiece, and they certainly deserved credit for the hard work they did in learning their lines, whisking in and out of various costumes, and managing the stage besides. On Christmas night, a dozen girls, friends of the March sisters, went upstairs to a bedroom transformed into a theater, and piled onto the bed, which was the dress circle, and sat before the blue and yellow homemade curtains. There was a good deal of rustling and whispering behind the curtain, and an occasional giggle from Amy, who was apt to get hysterical. Soon a bell sounded, the curtains flew apart, and the operatic tragedy began. It was a long, complicated play, but very satisfying, and the audience of girls gave it tremendous applause when it was over. From this excitement, the girls were invited by Mrs. March to come down to supper. This supper was a surprise, even to the actors, and when they saw the table, they looked at one another in amazement. It was like Marmee. It was like Marmee to get up a little treat for them, but anything so fine as this was unheard of since the departed days of plenty. There was ice cream, actually 2 dishes of it, pink and white, and cake, and fruit, and bonbons, and in the middle of the table 4 great bouquets of hothouse flowers. It quite took their breath away, and they stared first at the table and then at their mother. "Is it fairies?" asked Amy. "It's Santa Claus," said Beth. "Mother did it," said Meg, smiling her sweetest. "Aunt March had a good fit and sent the supper," cried Joe. "All wrong. Old Mr. Lawrence sent it," replied Mrs. March. "The Lawrence boy's grandfather? What in the world put such a thing into his head? We don't know him," exclaimed Meg. "Hannah told one of his servants about your breakfast party. He is an odd old gentleman, but that pleased him. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note this afternoon, saying he hoped I would allow him to express his friendly feelings towards my children by sending them a few trifles in honor of the day. I could not refuse, and so you have a little feast at night to make up for the bread and milk breakfast." "That boy put it into his head, I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. He looks as if he'd like to know us, but he's bashful. And Meg is so prim, she won't let me speak to him when we pass," said Joe. "You mean the people who live in the big house next door, don't you?" asked one of Meg's friends. "My mother knows old Mr. Lawrence, but says he's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. He keeps his grandson shut up when he isn't riding or walking with his tutor and makes him study very hard. We invited him to a party, but he didn't come. Mother says he's very nice, though he never speaks to us girls. Our cat ran away once, and he brought her back, and we talked over the fence, and were getting on capitally when he saw Meg coming and walked off. I mean to know him some day, for he needs fun. I'm sure he does," said Joe. "I like his manners, and he looks like a little gentleman, so I've no objection to your knowing him, if a proper opportunity comes. He brought the flowers himself, and I should have asked him in, if I had been sure what was going on upstairs. He looked so sad as he went away, hearing the fun, and evidently having none of his own." "It's a mercy you didn't, Mother," laughed Joe. "But we'll have another place sometime that he can see. Perhaps he'll help act. Wouldn't that be jolly? I never had such a fine bouquet before. How pretty it is!" And Meg examined her flowers with great interest. "They are lovely, but Beth's roses are sweeter to me," said Mrs. March, smelling the half-dead flower in her belt. Beth nestled up to her and whispered softly, "I wish I could send my bunch to Father. I'm afraid he isn't having such a Merry Christmas as we are." Remembering that he's off at the war, helping with the Civil War. Okay, so back up to the top. Yeah, there we go. All right, so the first we have, "Goodness only knows. Some poor creature come a-begging, and your ma went straight off to see what was needed," replied Hannah. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning, click on my mouse, regular click, and drag all the way across and down until the whole thing is highlighted. Then with the right click on copy, because I know some of you have a mouse now that you didn't before, so I'm going to go through it a little bit slowly. And this is Hannah talking. So let's go over and find Hannah's page and go to dialogue because she's talking. We've got the quotation marks. This is something that she said. And my mouse, I see the cursor right here before the D. I need the mouse over here after the colon. Enter once on the keyboard. I'm going to drop the font down to 10. Oops, one too many. Okay, and then I'm going to come back here by the cursor and right click, paste. And now we have a direct quote from Hannah. I'm going to move this over. See if I can get that out of my way. There we go. Okay, so now back to Little Women. Our second is not a quote. There never was such a woman for giving away victuals and drink, clothes and firewood. So this is something that Hannah said, but who is it describing? Who's she talking about? Control C on your keyboard. You want to use those instead of the right click. She is talking about Marnie. There was never such a woman for giving away victuals and drink, clothes and firewood. So she's the one that does a lot of the charity work, helping the poor and hungry. So let's go to Marnie and add to, let's see, we could put this in description, but this is really talking about how Hannah sees Marnie. So I'm going to go over to how society sees them and get the cursor right after the colon, enter on the keyboard, font at 10, and Control V on the keyboard. This is talking about her abundance of charity. Never was such a woman that gave away so much. Victuals would be another word for food, and drink. Milk probably would be the most common. Clothes and firewood. All right, where'd my mouse go? I lost my mouse. There it is. Okay. Now back to Little Women. The next one. Hannah had lived with the family since Meg was born. Aha! We were talking about wondering how long Hannah had been there. So Meg is 16, so Hannah has been with the family for 16 years. I'll do it on the mouse again. So I'm going to put my cursor over where I highlighted, right click, copy. And we're going to go back to Hannah. Uh-oh, did I put that on Beth? Did I do that? No, okay, good. I think I just did something wrong. So let's go back to Hannah. And now we have more of a description. Hannah is their servant. So I've got the cursor right here at the end of this sentence. And now I'm going to click enter once on the keyboard. I don't need to change the font. It stayed at 10. Right click and paste. So we're adding to our description of Hannah. Back to Little Women. Hannah was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. This is talking about how the family sees Hannah. Even though she is a servant, they see her as a friend. This is a great example of how society or other people view a character. The family views Hannah as a friend. Control C on the keyboard. So on Hannah's page, which we're already on, how society sees them, I'm going to get my cursor here after the colon, enter on the keyboard. This one's still at 18, so I'm going to drop the font down to 10. And right click paste. Hannah was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. How the family sees Hannah. Good. Okay, so now down past the next page and past page 11. And we have a quote from Meg, and I really liked this quote. "That's loving our neighbor better than ourselves, and I like it," said Meg. This goes along with what we were talking about with the little signs that we're going to do like for our Christmas program. Loving, love your neighbor. That's goes right along with what we're having now with COVID. Help your neighbors. If anybody is in need of help, we've been doing a lot of that lately. If you have an elderly neighbor and they really shouldn't be going to the grocery store, a lot of people are doing their grocery shopping for them. Lots of ways that people are helping their neighbors right now through this time. So let's add this quote to Meg. I did a Control-C on the keyboard. And Meg is our first character slide, way back up at the top. And we've got a couple of, not in description. Dialogue. We don't have any dialogue for Meg. This is great. Okay, good. Right here after the colon. And I'm going to drop this down to 10. And Control-V. Oops, I forgot to click Enter. All right, let me get my cursor right there. Now, see how I got the cursor right in between the colon and the quotation mark? Now I'm going to click Enter on my keyboard. Good. Okay, so we have some dialogue there for Meg. Back to Little Women. And he's a capital fellow, but he's bashful. I like his manners, and he looks like a gentleman. So they're talking about another character, and this is how they see him. So who are they talking about? He's a capital fellow, but he's bashful. I like his manners, and he looks like a gentleman. This is actually the grandson that lives next door. Mr. Lawrence is the grandfather. He's very wealthy, has a huge home, lots of servants. And his grandson lives with him. We will be learning more about him in future chapters about both of these characters, but this is how the girls at this time see him. So right now, just knowing him very little, they're calling him a capital fellow. And when they say a capital fellow, that means that he's a good boy. It'd be in the simplest terms, but it's even better than good. Very well behaved, just top notch, just the nicest, seems like one of the nicest guys or boys or neighbors or friends that anybody could have. If you're a capital friend or a capital fellow, you're the best. You're at the top of the heap. Control-C. That's a word that we don't use. We hear gentleman, and you might hear fellow once in a while and bashful, but the word capital as an adjective we don't use commonly today. So let's go down, and I'm going to tell you his name. His name is Laurie. Yes, actually his name, last name is Lawrence. And so his nickname is Laurie. I'm going to add more names to this. But for right now, we're going to go to How Society Sees Them. And click right after the colon. Go Enter, so I don't forget this time. Down to 10. And paste. So this is what the girls are thinking about him. Back to Little Women. Now look at the next one. He's an odd fellow. He's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. Mother says he's very nice. Now, they're not talking about the grandson anymore. Now they're talking about the grandfather. This is old Mr. Lawrence. He's an odd fellow, which means, he's a little strange just because they don't know him. He's very proud, and he doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. So he's not coming out and talking to the neighbors. He's not waving as he goes by. But people that have talked to him have said that he's very nice. These are not uncommon traits. Some people are bashful and shy. They're not outgoing. They don't like talking to strangers. It makes them uncomfortable. But if you get to know somebody and they're not a stranger anymore, then you realize, oh, hey, they're really very nice. They just don't really talk to strangers very well. So now let's go find grandfather's slide. And Mr. Lawrence. So it's right after father. It'll say Mr. Lawrence. And we have another great addition to how society sees them for Mr. Lawrence. He's an odd fellow. He's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. Mother says he's very nice. So that's what the family thinks of Mr. Lawrence at this point. Okay, and that's the end. That's all of them. There we go. Good job. Okay, so